WFJA 105.5, Sanford, Pinehurst, Southern Pines.
It's now time for the Recovery Boys, Lewis Finch and Macon Moy, as they spend the next hour with you discussing the issues of alcoholism and drug addiction, as well as the road to recovery. Here's Lewis and Macon.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Macon Moy. I want to thank you if you're out there listening to us. This is our inaugural show, our first show. This show came about. Well, first off, let me welcome Lewis, my co-host, Lewis Finch. Good evening, Lewis.
Thank you, Macon. I was wondering if you knew I was here.
Well, I so appreciate you showing up. I did bring my wife, Taylor, with me. I would have brought her in if I'd have had to, but I appreciate you being here. And for all those people out there listening, I want to do a little bit of house cleaning. So if you're listening to us and you have a question about addiction, recovery, drug addiction, any questions you might have, you can reach us at 866-465-3110. If you have friends who are not in our listening area but want to hear our show, as we're going to be doing this every Wednesday night from 8 to 9. And if you have other people, family members, people who have problems or just want some information about recovery, drug addiction, opiate addiction, alcoholism, all the things that we have some information about, both through personal use and education. You can listen online at www.wfjawwgpradio.com. We also, since this is we're just starting this is something that I've wanted to do since I got sober 7 years ago. Actually, 7 years ago today.
Congratulations.
Yeah, today is my sober birthday. Very blessed to be sitting here in Sanford, North Carolina, knowing where I am and knowing what I'm doing. That's quite an accomplishment.
Macon, how did you do it?
A day at a time, Lewis. A day at a time. That's just what they tell us. But we will have a website that we have started called therecoveryboys.com. Lewis came up with the name, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. The Recovery Boys, because we both are in recovery. I should back up and tell you that.
Way to out me, Macon. I appreciate that.
I should back up and tell you that I am a recovering alcoholic and drug addict, and I have. We'll talk about that over the course of tonight and over the course of the year about what happened to both of us and how we ended up on the radio. And I think one of the things that we hope for this show, the thing that we hope the most, is that we'll be able to help another alcoholic, another drug addict, or the families, friends, the people that get affected, because one of the things that we've discovered is there's so little real information out there on how to do an intervention or what the treatment options are or what happens after care. And Lewis, I'll let you catch up here in 1 second. I will say that tonight we do have a guest. Every week we will have a guest call in. Sometimes they'll be here. We do hope to have both the local sheriff from Moore County and the local sheriff from Lee County to talk about the drug problems we have in our area and the things that we're trying to do to address those things and what your options may be. But tonight we have a national guest. It's a friend of mine. His name is Thomas Hollywood Henderson. And for those of you that are Dallas Cowboy fans, you've heard his name. He's become a friend. He's a very powerful speaker. And we'll be talking to him around 8:20. And so one of the great things about Thomas is all you have to do is ask him a question and then just be quiet, because he'll start talking and it won't stop for a while. And then the show topic tonight is surrender. And I'm going to hush here for a second and let Lewis introduce himself to you guys. But one other quick fact I'd like to talk about is, I was in Sanford in 1974 playing football, high school football for Greenville Rose High School. I'm from Greenville, North Carolina. And we played Sanford Central, and Coach Gay, Paul Gay, and his son, who I became friends with, PJ Gay. And so I find it somewhat ironic that I'm sitting in here in their town, so many years later. But we're blessed. We do want to thank all the people who have helped us, John Hockaday especially, who has allowed us to come on and to produce this show. And we're looking forward to becoming a resource for the community and hopefully helping Lee County, Moore County, and all the other counties that can pick us up, get some information about the drug problem, the alcohol problem. And so with that, I will introduce you to Lewis Finch. Lewis?
Thank you, Macon. I do want to piggyback on what you said, though, and I can fill in the gaps around my story. I can fill in the gaps around my story later date or later time, but since this is your anniversary, your birthday,
Yes.
I would love for you to tell how you got here, because to me that's the part of this that's the magic part. Because I'll guarantee you, 7 years ago, things weren't looking up the way they are now.
That is so true. So I was a quick story. I'll make my story quick. I was a very accomplished golfer, and so I played golf for a living and professionally, and so I had a good time. I wasn't such a good earner, but I did have a good time. But I was also a very social guy, and so let's just say that drinking came natural to me through family genetics and everything else. But I quit playing golf in 1987 and went to work in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a radio station of all things. And the business suited me. I was very fortunate to land at a radio station that a friend of mine owned from Boston, and it was called WRFX. And we had a morning show there called John Boy and Billy. I eventually became the general manager. But the long and short of it is I had a job that paid me to drink and have a good time. And,
I don't see the problem with that.
Yeah, well, most people that become alcoholics or drug addicts, it becomes something that they do. I got paid to do it. And I was extremely good at it. Let's just suffice it to say that I drank alcoholically for a long time, and I was successful doing it. And business was good. And, one of the things, one of the dangers of being an alcoholic is as long as you're producing and as long as you're financially doing well and give the appearance that you have your stuff together, nobody really keeps up with what you're doing.
They call it a functioning alcoholic.
I was a high functional alcoholic, and probably would still be one if I hadn't been introduced to opiates. I was, I had some aches and pains from baseball and golf and all the other stuff, and had some surgeries. And the first time I took an opiate, a Vicodin, and washed it down with a vodka, it was a marriage. And it's something that I chased. I chased that feeling. I think one of the things that drug addicts and alcoholics will tell you is that if you like the way it makes you feel, and I certainly loved the way it made me feel, you chase that high. You chase that high, and I chased it right into where it cost me my family. It cost me all my money. I ended up in the hospital in 2012. I was in the hospital, Lewis, and I almost died. I was in the hospital for almost 3 months, and it was just horrible. And I chased that, that insanity of thinking I could drink normally. So anyway, how I ended up here was I didn't die, and I was fortunate enough to meet a bunch of good people who really helped me through treatment and through some recovery fellowships. I've learned how to live in recovery. And, on our website, both of our stories are on there. So if you wanted to have a little bit more information about how we ended up here, and listen, some of you people will know who I am. I'm still a decent golfer. I still play golf in the state of North Carolina. John Boy and Billy was a fairly big show. So I was on the air with those guys for a long time. So I ended up here, Lewis. I'm fortunate to be 7 years clean and sober. But I sure did put my time in on the other side. I can promise you that.
That's great. Glad to have you back.
Well, thank you.
I'm sure that when you were doing your thing, as it is, you weren't living under a bridge at that point, were you?
No, I was not. I had a very high-end life. I mean, nice cars, nice things, plenty of money. All the appearances of being a very successful businessman, father, husband, all the different things that society demands of successful people. And I was very good at displaying all those things. But the truth of the matter is that I was drinking the whole time.
Yeah. Well, I can kind of parallel some of that, except the golfing. By the way, what's your handicap?
Right now, the only handicap I have is I don't get a chance to play as much as I'd like to.
You're avoiding the question, but
Yeah.
I guarantee it's better than mine. Mine's at least 18. If it goes any higher, I don't know what that is. So my story is that I started drinking and doing other things around the age of 13. So I didn't start the way I finished, but I remember vividly the feeling that it left in my head when I started. I progressed through adolescence, but the wheels kind of came off when I went off to when I went to high school. It was so bad that my parents ended up shipping me off to prep school for my last 2 years of my 11th and 12th grade. I then went to college where I really cranked it up. And for the next, 30 years, I just kept the pedal to the metal. There were a lot of broken promises, a lot of problems with relationships. But I kind of, to your point, I kind of held it together to some degree. I was one of those functioning alcoholic addicts. But in the end, and I'll go into more detail later, but in the end, what ended up happening to me was I got my second and third DWIs in a matter of 90 days, and that tends to get your attention. In fact, at that point, the government says they don't want you driving the roads anymore, and they're going to pretty much put you behind bars, at least for a period of time. At least that's what I thought. And that's what finally got my attention. And it took that long for it to happen. And our topic for tonight is surrender. We fight this thing. We fight it like crazy. I have never in my life fought on to something, to hold on to something that was killing me more than my addiction. It's ironic too, because after I got sober, by the way, I've been sober a little over 12 years.
Congrats.
Well, thank you. But and I thought my life was chaotic prior to that. And it was, but it was nothing like what happened after I got sober. And in order, I lost my father, my wife, and my mother in back-to-back-to-back years. I then did what every good alcoholic and addict does. I went out and started dating immediately because God knows I was such a catch. And I got married and divorced 2 years later. I then liquidated a business that I owned and retired at the age of 56 and had nothing to do. And I was bored out of my mind. I ended up getting a job in a treatment center, ironically the same treatment center that I had gone to get help. And I learned the business model of addiction treatment and came back to Raleigh and opened up an outpatient center that serves me, my demographic. It basically, and I jokingly say I opened a shrine to my recovery. And it basically was folks, executives, professionals, and their families who, if they needed help, would have a very difficult time not sitting in rooms with their clients or folks they may know in the community. And that's pretty much my abbreviated story.
Well, we'll get deeper into our stories over the course of the year. But what's the name of your business?
It's Wellwin Outpatient Center.
Wellwin Outpatient Center is in Raleigh.
North Raleigh, yes.
Yeah. And if somebody wanted to call you and talk to you, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, they can reach me at, actually, I would recommend them calling my personal mobile number at 919-210-7390.
Perfect. Well, if you're out there and you have a need, Lewis, they run an unbelievable operation in Raleigh, and I would also tell you that I have a nonprofit that I run called Chloe's Place. I'll explain that down the road. Chloe's my dog, was the one sweet little girl that stayed around when I was falling down the steps and having some real problems. So the least I could do is name my nonprofit. But I do have a master's in addiction counseling and co-occurring disorders from Hazelden and Betty Ford. So we're not a couple of quacks in here just ranting and raving. I mean, we do actually have some education about this. And we also, I think it's important for anybody that's out there listening to know is that we care about people. I think that most people that work in the recovery industry are in recovery themselves. Not all of them. But there's a certain kind of pain that we all who go through addiction and survive and go into recovery. There's a certain amount of pain and I guess empathy we have for those people out there that are still suffering. And so what my goal is personally, and I know from my conversations with Lewis, is to be a resource. And if we just help one person stop drinking or stop drugging and can send them back into society or back to their families or back to their kids or to their husband or wife, you know what? That's what we're trying to do. And that's what we want this show to become. We want this show to become a resource for people. So if they have a question, if they need some help, you can reach out to us. And the local phone number here, or the phone number here is 866-465-3110. Or you can, our website's brand new. It's just, it's not completely built out yet, but you can go to therecoveryboys.com and there'll be a way for you to send us emails during the week. I'm sure that we'll both access our social media platforms. So we want this show to be it's going to be a weekly show from 8 to 9, but we're going to pay attention to it 7 days a week because we want it to become an information resource. That's one of the things I get more questions. And one of the real difficulties about dealing with somebody in addiction is that you typically find out information when you're in the middle of a crisis, when you need the information to make a difference in the life of somebody. And so we want to make sure that people know if you need answers to questions, does somebody have a problem? If I don't have insurance, Lewis has all kinds of questions. He thinks about this more than I do, to be honest with you. But we want to become a resource. And so that's our brief little opening. We're gonna get our guest on the line here in just a second. And as we said, the topic tonight, surrender. And, I was looking up, Lewis, before we came in, I was looking, I always like to look at the definition of a word, and the verb definition of surrender is to cease resistance to an enemy or opponent. In our particular case, sobriety was that enemy or opponent, and submit to their authority, which is one of the things that alcoholics and drug addicts, we view sobriety as the enemy. The noun of the meaning of the noun meaning of the word surrender is the action of surrendering. And then I pulled this up off of one of the off the website, Freedom Institute. Surrender is the foundation and ground upon which recovery is built. Recovery begins with surrender, since without it, there's little possibility for change. It is the platform on which we build new, changed, and sober lives. So,
Macon, you did touch on something that I want to reiterate, that because although surrendering sounds like a passive verb, there's a very actionable component of this. But particularly recovery is an action process. You can't just simply stop doing something and expect the problem to go away. So that's, surrender may sound like it's just one and done. It's anything but that.
There's no question about it. And joining us on the phone now is my friend Thomas Henderson. Thomas, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, Macon. How are you?
I'm doing good, buddy. And listen, thank you so much for joining us on the on our first show. Thomas, we've become friends, golf partners, but friends in recovery. And I spoke to you earlier today, and it was your idea to talk about the topic surrender. So before we even get into that, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about Thomas Henderson and what your life's like today.
I'm Thomas Henderson, born Austin, Texas. I went to college in Oklahoma. Got drafted by the Dallas Cowboys in 1975. Played in 3 Super Bowls with the Dallas Cowboys. Won a world championship, Super Bowl 12. Made the Pro Bowl. Life was great and good. In the middle of all that, began this relationship with alcohol and drugs. And I wasn't a big drinker until later, but I had this relationship with cocaine that turned into smoking crack and meth and opioids and Quaaludes and 151 rum. And I wasn't going to stop, it seemed. And there was nobody to stop me, Mr. Hollywood Henderson. I do not remember 1982 and 1983. My addiction got that bad, and I was arrested in Southern California, accused of sexual misconduct, and I did some time in prison. Before that, I went to a treatment center early November 1983, and it was a complete surrender. I seemed to have met the right people at the right time. I was taken there. I can't take credit for surrendering. I was surrendered.
Yeah.
But I took on to it. I was afraid. I was lost. I was confused. I could not believe the problems I was having. My bottom was embarrassing, hurt my family, my mother. If there's a big hurt that can change a man's life, I guess I'm one of those people who it took what it took, but here I am. I'm in my 36th year in recovery, and I owe that to a lot of people, including my psychiatrist.
Well, you know what, Thomas? I've been around you, and you wear your sobriety openly for people to see, and I think that speaks volumes for you. But I was just wondering, tell me all the things that you do today. One of the things, surrendering is the start of the process, but getting sober is probably a little bit easier than staying sober. And so, one of the things we want this show to become is some kind of a resource for people who are, hopefully somebody listening tonight has decided they've had enough, or maybe a family member has decided it's time to speak to somebody. And so, we talk about the process. You and I have had conversations about the process and about aftercare. So I know one of the things I do want you to speak about are some of the products you've put out there for people that are new to recovery, and some of the things that you see work for people. And then also, I want to introduce you to my partner here, Lewis Finch. Lewis actually has some questions more football related than addiction related, which is cool, which is fine.
Okay.
But
I can work addiction in.
Okay.
But speak to that if you will, Thomas. Speak to, 36 years is an amazing amount of time to stay away from something that you so clearly love so much.
Yeah. I think that my bottom was so tragic and so hurtful that, I don't I don't want anybody else to have to go where I went. But recovery and sustaining it it has to become the most important product of yourself. You have to want to be clean and sober. You can be clean and sober. I'm a big fan of therapy and counseling and aftercare. There are 12-step groups of all stripes in our communities. I've stayed with what brung me here, and so I continue to be a recovering alcoholic who oftentimes goes back to what brung me here and what keeps me here. I didn't have anybody around me like family or friends, because we all know somebody who's got a problem, and some of us know that we have a problem. But oftentimes we're afraid to show the love of an intervention. We're often afraid to confront our brother, our uncle, our neighbor, our friend, our mother, our father, our son, our daughter. We tend to, be afraid to help save somebody's life. Drugs and alcohol are killing people every day. They're talking about vaping, and man, alcohol and drugs has killed more people than has ever been killed in the world. And so if there's anything I could say tonight, is if you have a son, a brother, a father, a family member, a cousin, a neighbor, a guy, a girl at work, if you know somebody with a problem, and they know they have a problem, and when you know they have a problem, man, show some love. And for those of you who want to change your life, get yourself in a treatment center, or find some of the self-help groups in your community, some of the 12-step groups that are in your community, and just go grab a chair and claim it. Claim the chair. 36 years, almost 36 years later, I'm still doing those little things that keep me centered. After I went through all of that stuff, God blessed me with, I won a $28 million lottery. Now, I didn't get that much. I got about a third of it, but I have been able to live a good, quiet life. I play golf with Macon and Roy and, Michael Jordan, and I'm going to play in the Miami Dolphin golf tournament this Friday. If it's still going on, I probably can beat everybody down there. But I wouldn't trade my life today for any other portion of my life. And what I do, I make films for rehabs. I think, Macon, you have a whole set of my films.
Yes, I do, buddy. I do.
I've written 2 books. And so my life, in a nutshell, is Thomas Henderson. Thomas Hollywood Henderson is a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. And I am very proud of that.
As you should be. I think Lewis had a quick question or two for you.
Yeah, Thomas, this is Lewis. I just want to tell you how much I admire what you have done. One of the things that amazes me, and I see this on a daily basis, are the young people who come into recovery. I couldn't do that. I could not have done it. You were probably in your early 20s, mid to late 20s when you got you got your
30. Yeah, thanks for being so nice.
Well, you looked a whole lot better than 30. But so you were 30. Okay, that's still young.
No.
And plus, you didn't have the advantages of all the treatment that's out there now. I just was wondering, and even, there've been parts of recovery where, or stages of recovery, I like to call them, and you came in right after Betty Ford came out and then founded the Betty Ford Clinic. So there was still this stigma and shame around the disease. How did you do it?
Well, I used to go to some meetings with Betty out in Southern California. I really don't know, man. I'll tell you a story that is as true as anything I'll ever tell you. At this treatment center, we were given like an hour to go down to the 7-Eleven to get a Snickers bar, Dr. Pepper, a Coke, whatever you wanted. And a red-headed boy from Boston was my roommate at that time. And we went down to the 7-Eleven, and it was about 3 blocks. And I went in there and got a Snickers bar and a Dr. Pepper, and he gets a pint of vodka. And so we are walking back to the treatment center, and he is chugging on this vodka, and I'm looking at him. I am so young. I'm just, like a week or two out of detox. But as my higher power would have it, I saw the disease in this man. I couldn't look in the mirror and see the disease, but I saw us going to the store to get a candy bar and some sugar, which we shouldn't have been doing. And he turned it into an alcoholic episode where I was the eyewitness to the disease that I had never seen, really. I hadn't even looked for it. And in part, that saved my life. I'm going, we're in treatment, dude. You're drinking, dude. What? And so, as God would have it, I saw the disease, and I didn't like what I saw. And at his expense, I saw the disease of alcoholism.
I noticed, I actually watched the YouTube video that was on Recovery Unplugged, and you referred to it as the ism, which I thought was very informative, because I don't think most people think of it as an ism, but that's exactly what it is.
Well, it's like, there's so many colors, there's green, orange, blue, black, they're the base color. And so the ism is whatever yours is yours. It's yoursen and there's minesen. and I don't think anybody's recovery is the same. There is hurts that can't, the Band-Aid ain't big enough. There are, heartbreaking things in our lives where we weren't treated right. And so, boy, we all have something to cry about. But when you get through crying about it, and you talk about it and you get it out, if you're brave, you'll do that. Then it's time to live and have a good time, and do it sober, do it clean. I have the wherewithal to go to Colombia and get me 4 or 5 mules and a wagon and 55-gallon drums of crack if I wanted to. But I choose today to be a sober father, grandfather. I got twin grandbabies who just turned 1 year old.
They're the best, aren't they?
I have a 21-year-old granddaughter in the Air Force. I have 2 daughters. I have a grandson catching touchdowns and looking like me. I have a good life, and it's all because. It's not because I played for the Dallas Cowboys. It's not because, of the films I've made or the books I've written. It's because I'm sober. My life is good because I'm sober. That's the only reason my life is good today, is because I'm sober. And that's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
I hear you, Thomas. Would you say, and we talked about this, you've accomplished unbelievable things in your life, but your sobriety is probably your greatest accomplishment. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I was a number 1 draft pick with the Cowboys. I finished college. I have a doctor's degree. I won the Super Bowl. I was all Pro Bowl. But my 35, don't get ahead of myself. I ain't made it yet.
That's right. That's right.
My 35 and a half years of doing this thing one day at a time is the greatest blessing of my life. You can't get help if you don't think you need help. And too many of us, addicts and alcoholics, we don't even die trying. Some just die.
It's unfortunate, but we talk about the bottom, the alcoholic and the drug addict bottom. Unfortunately, and we all know cases of it. Sometimes death is that bottom, and we all sit around and we all talk about what could we have done, what should we have done. But at the end of the day, recovery is dependent on the person. I can't make somebody go to recovery. You and I have had this conversation. It takes the right amount of pain, and everybody's threshold for pain is different. But you have to, at some point, it has to hurt bad enough for you to change.
Sometimes it takes an episode. I had several of those episodes, but and until they put the handcuffs on me, I really wasn't paying attention to my life. Football is a very difficult game to play. A lot of injuries. There's a lot of drugs being, used and given for pain and everything else, and you sort of get lost in this thing of chemicals, and you hurt your hamstring. Oh, here's a pill for that. You're sore? Okay, here's a pill for that. You got a headache? Okay, here's a pill for that. But here's a thing that I've noticed in the last 10 years. Pain is, I think, is the biggest contributor to people developing dependencies on alcohol and drugs. If you would ask me what is pain, boy, if I could share it with you, boy, you'd be on the floor screaming and hollering.
Yeah.
And so we don't even know what pain is anymore. I do, because I played the toughest game in the world, and I know what pain is. And so, for instance, I had some dental work done recently, and they were in my mouth for 6 hours. And so I get up, and they've written me a prescription. And so I take the prescription. I was in Dallas, and I had to drive back to Austin. This was about 3 weeks ago. And they had called it into the Walmart. And so I'm driving, and my whole mouth is numb. And I asked myself a question. I said, "Now, are you in pain, or just a little uncomfortable because they've been digging in your mouth for 6 hours?" I said, "You know what? They've been digging in my mouth 6 hours. When this anesthetic wears off, I'm gonna be all right. I'll be fine." And so I drove past the Walmart and got on I-35 and drove to Austin, and got home and went to bed. Woke up the next day, I felt fine. Now, so I don't even take the opportunity to take OxyContin or oxycodone. I just, I'm honest with Thomas. And so I have never had, this is pretty good. I have never had an OxyContin. When I had my knee surgery now, that was a whole other story. I cried. I mean, it was, they cut my leg off and put it back on.
Yeah, I've had that happen.
And Dr. Persh and my sponsor talked to my caretaker, and, about the third day, they said, throw everything in the toilet.
Yeah.
So I haven't even had the accidental thing on pills and pain because I've always asked people to come and help me and watch me as I go through something. And so it doesn't matter if you got 50 years or 35 years, you still have to be careful about the chemicals or anything that you put in your body that is going to be mind-altering, that could really change your life. So no matter how much time you have in recovery, you still have to be careful.
You know, Thomas, you and I were talking, I think maybe last week, or maybe we were texting or whatever, but we were also talking about the incredible amount of fentanyl that's showing up on the streets. You know, you're talking about prescription drugs that have been prescribed by a doctor, but, you know, the street is full of stuff out there now, and I'm amazed, I'm horrified at these addicts, young kids, older people, whatever, that are still, you know, taking their life in their hands every time they take something and not sure where it came from. And you made the comment to me, you know, it stuck with me when we were talking about the fentanyl. There was actually my wife and I watched a 60 Minutes piece on fentanyl, and your comment to me was, "I'd be dead." You know, and if it was out there when I was using, I'd be dead. And you know, you talk about how many people are dying. Well, I mean, that stuff is out there. It is everywhere. And so,
if you're willing to take a package from somebody that's not a pharmacist, on a street corner, in an alley, from your dealer, and you're going to trust that they are a pharmacist, you're taking your life into your hands every time you make a transaction.
That's really insanity.
It's that serious. It's that serious. Because I was such an addict and alcoholic that whatever you laid out, I was going to dive into. And that was just my modus operandi. And that's when I made that comic to Macon. I said, you know, if fentanyl would have been on the streets when I was out there, I'd be dead.
Yep. Yeah, and you know, it's the sad part of it is, and I've met them. You know, I know some of them, and I've met some of them. I mean, there are parents and there are husbands and wives burying people out there that they weren't even aware there was a problem, and that's how fast this thing can grab you. So,
but by the way, so anybody listening to this tonight, if you're a parent, if you're a kid, listen. The first thing that one has to do is to recognize that there's danger with alcohol and drugs, pills, cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, opioids, all of it, that you ought to, like, first of all, stop. If you can't stop and you find yourself out there getting, packages from, Joseph and Johnny and Billy and, you're just getting stuff on the streets, it's Russian roulette. And I know it's easy for me now to say, you got to give it up or you need to quit. But I believe that. I believe that the altered state is something you buy. The altered state is something you buy or you pay for. I don't like either one of those things.
Yeah, me. You know what, Thomas? I don't either, buddy. Well, listen, the time is rapidly approaching our first hour up here. So I want to thank you so much. Louis, you got one more question?
I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
I just happened, as I said, I watched the video on Recovery Unplugged, but the one directly after it fascinated me. And I told Macon this. It was the hit you did on Earl Campbell. Did it ring your bell at all?
No, it don't hurt when you win.
Oh man,
Yeah.
it hurt me watching that.
You know, if you ever notice that when there's a collision, if both guys stay down, that's a tie. If one guy gets up, he won. So it's just a matter of a tenth of an inch or so much compression. So the hit on Earl Campbell, which is on YouTube, it's Hollywood Henderson versus Earl Campbell. I won that one.
I would agree.
Well, hey, listen, Thomas, I hope you play well down in Miami. Thomas, just to brag on Thomas a little bit, or brag on our buddy Roy, we've won the Hoop T golf tournament in Charlotte a couple of times in a row. So we have a pretty good franchise that we built in Charlotte. That's how Thomas and I got to be such good friends. But you know, the passion we share is recovery. And Thomas, I can't thank you enough for being our first guest on this show, and we will have you on again. And
well, it was an honor and a privilege, and I want to remind you of something. I'm still appreciate. I hit that 5-iron when we were playing the last time, and you came over and said, "Boy, that was a good shot." It
was pure. It was perfect. You know, the best Thomas shot that I can remember is that little chip you made in the shootout.
Oh yeah,
that was a big deal.
Yes. Well, that's pressure.
That's exactly right. That is pressure. That's pressure.
Hey, to everybody out there in the world of alcohol and drugs, to everybody, from me to you, be careful.
All right, Thomas. Thanks so much, buddy, and we look forward to. I'll catch up with you later on this week or sometime soon. But thanks for calling.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Thomas.
Bye-bye.
So, Lewis, I think that I've been fortunate enough to have been around Thomas more than once. He's got some unbelievable stories. You know, I think all of us that are in recovery, we have to be. We have to be careful not to romanticize the war stories. I think that's one of the things for me is when I first got sober. First off, I didn't remember a lot of them, but as you get more time in sobriety, I think some of that stuff floats back up. But just appreciating waking up in the morning, knowing where you are, knowing what you did last night. Those are the things that surrender allows to start. And, we talked about, do you remember? I can remember my surrender. I can remember it like it was yesterday. And I had tried, I don't know how many times, I used to tell the guys in the card room, you know what, I'm going to not drink this year and I'm going to have a really good golf season. And I would make it 2 days, maybe a day and a half. And then it would be, well, I think I have a beer. A beer's not going to hurt me. And then, next thing you know, not only am I back drinking what I used to drink, I'm drinking more. And of course, I never even considered to stop using the opiates. They had just become fuel. They had become fuel for me. But I remember, you can't drink the way I drank and take pills the way I took pills and not have some physical consequences. And so that's what happened to me. But I remember the doctor, it was literally, I left my mother's funeral and went straight to the doctor because my brothers and my kids saw the physical wear and tear, and nobody had really paid attention to it. And then all of a sudden they all paid attention to it. It's that moment of truth that I think all of us in recovery eventually, if you're lucky, it comes to you. And so, I never would own up to my kids or to my brothers that I was an alcoholic, but still thinking maybe I could pull this off. Maybe I could get back to Charlotte, whatever. I was in Greenville, North Carolina at the time, but I'll never forget the doctor who came in because they took me to the hospital because I was bleeding internally, and my ankles had swollen because for those of us who are alcoholics, that your body starts to take the share of the body blows. But the doctor came in and he asked me, he said, what? And he knew me from playing Little League Baseball in Greenville. I mean, he knew who I was. And he looked at me and he said, Macon, what is going on? And it was the first time in my life, I'm 55 years old. First time in my life, I said, I can't stop drinking. And I said it in a way that it scared me. I heard myself say it. And I was like, oh my goodness, everything's going to be different from now on. And I'd love to tell you that I stopped drinking after I said that, but that's just not what happened. I had one more big drink, one more spree, one more episode, which landed me in the hospital, almost killed me. But, surrender has to happen for recovery to begin. I mean, it's just the way it works. Do you remember yours?
Oh, yes. I was in a little town jail in upstate New York, in Batavia, New York. Most people don't even know where that is. It's right outside of Buffalo. And it was so small, I was the only guy in the jail, and I was the only person on the docket that day. In fact, I knew I was in trouble when the judge came in, and when he walked, he clanged because they had to get him off the golf course, and he was on his golf shoes. And he came in, and he was upset that he was being pulled off the golf course to process this idiot, me. And I remember calling my wife and sobbing uncontrollably because I had promised her time and time again that I would stop. In fact, I was one of those alcoholics, you may be able to relate to this, that I would check the box by going to a 12-step meeting, leave and drive directly to the ABC store and go to my townhouse and drink. That's how sick I was. Now, upon hindsight, I just wasted a good hour. I could have been drinking for that hour. But no, I had to check that box. But that was my last stand. It took the judicial system and letting my family down one last time to get my attention. I even I even planned my escape to treatment and took, I believe, over 6 weeks to go to treatment. And it upset me when I went to treatment because I was the only person who came into treatment sober. They couldn't believe it in detox because I blew a zero and there was no alcohol in my system at all. But that was my surrender. And I have, to your point, it has not been easy. It never will be because I have the disease of alcoholism and addiction.
The disease is, that's one of the things that we want to make sure we say over and over again is that it's a disease. It's not a moral shortcoming. It's not you're a bad person. I mean, we do plenty of bad things, and there will be some people who would like to argue with you and tell you that we're the worst people they've ever met in their life. But it is a disease. It's just a heinous disease, and it's if you suffer from it, you know what we're talking about. If you have a family member that suffers from it, you've seen it. And so one of the things, that we want to be able to do this year on this show is answer some of those questions. Lewis, you had a good list when we met before we decided to do this show. And, some of those questions we want to answer, what is treatment?
How about this? What is addiction?
Yeah, what is addiction? How do I know how do I know I have a problem? And these are the things that we want to be able to share our experience with anybody that's listening. Also, what are my options?
Correct.
Yes. The thing is that this whole national opiate epidemic has made drug use and drug addiction and treatment front and center. One of the things we hear over and over again is these billions of dollars that these drug companies are going to have to pony up for creating this opiate epidemic. Well, our question, and you and I have had this conversation, is where's all that money going to go and what are they going to do with it? I mean, is it ever going to float down to the person on the street that's actually been affected by the opiate use? I mean, I know that there's a lot of here in Lee County and in Moore County, the sheriffs are inundated with people in their jail cells that are detoxing, that are drug sick. They don't have those deputies aren't equipped to handle that population. I mean, it's just a complete mess. So those are the things, those are the conversations that we want to have. We want to talk about, is there a better way to address this thing? But, we want to chase the money. We want to find out where it's going to go.
Weren't you telling me that something that you learned from, was it the sheriff's office or a police chief's office, that there was they basically use jail as detox?
Well, in smaller counties like ours, there's not really a homeless shelter, and so the homeless people end up in the county jail. I mean, that becomes the de facto homeless shelter. And it's cold outside, or they're hungry. There's very few options, and so. When you talk to your deputy sheriff, or you talk to the sheriff, or you talk to the local police, I mean, it is a real challenge for them to. It's a real challenge for them to figure out how to handle that crowd. So yeah, I mean, it's something else.
Well, I was just wondering because I think that until we can define the problem a little bit better across all demographics and all age groups, locales, I think we're still going to have this problem because, as you pointed out, the opioid epidemic is getting all of the press right now, but still more people are dying on an annual basis from alcoholism or alcohol-related disease, and have been. And that number is on the rise, by the way, not quite as much as drug addiction or drug overdoses, but it's still growing.
It is, and you know what? I would also argue that is the most underreported number. Whatever number they use is completely at the bottom. I mean, alcoholics die from all kinds of other medical complications that the alcohol has created. But if you look at the death certificate, it'll say kidney failure or heart attack, but it was chronic alcoholism that created the problems. So whatever they're telling us, this is how many people have died from alcoholism, the number is smaller than the actual. I don't think there's any question about that. And so, one of the things that we want to be able to do is answer questions like, what happens if somebody needs help, needs treatment, they don't have any insurance?
Yeah.
I mean, what happens? Those are the people that end up in the emergency rooms, end up in the jails. And you know what? We as a society can't turn our back on them. These are the repeat offenders. They turn to criminal activity for resources. And so, we hope to have some of both the sheriffs and, maybe some of the other folks from the correction side to be guests on the show to help us identify the problem and maybe discuss some of the solutions, because it's a community problem. It really is. We will also have, some doctors. We have at First Health here in the behavioral science department, behavioral services. They have Dr. Jason Jerry is a addictionologist, and he's a phenomenal man. And my wife works with him, and he's agreed to come on and be our guest to talk about treatment, and talk about, one of the things that we hear a lot of conversation about is medicated assisted treatment, Suboxone or drug addicts trading one drug for another drug. I mean, there's a lot of conversations about that. And so we really want to get into all those things as well. But it's been a good first hour for us, Lewis.
It has been. We're going to be hard pressed to find a guest like Thomas Henderson.
Well, Thomas is a phenomenal guy, but the great news for us is that the world is full of colorful alcoholics and drug addicts, and unfortunately, I knew most of them because I used to hang out with them. So our Rolodex is plentiful with guests that will, I think be interesting to listen to, but also be informative because, Thomas, some of the stories he'll tell you, which he can't we're certainly not going to tell on this air, but he did some pretty interesting things when he was in active addiction, as we all did. So we appreciate anybody out there that's listening. Lewis, I hope you have a good rest of the week. Tell all the folks at Wellwyn I said hello. We'll get this show. We'll make it a little bit tighter, hopefully a little bit more interesting. But we're doing this for a reason. We're doing this to help people.
Well, just to close us out, I'm Lewis.
And I'm Macon, and we're
the Recovery Boys.
We look forward to you next week.
You've been listening to The Recovery Boys on WFJA. Visit the Recovery Boys website at therecoveryboys.com. We thank you for listening to The Recovery Boys.